Okay. Slideshow. Go slide. Okay, you got some bright yellow arrows on your slide, on your screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So I spoke yesterday with Varroa management about needing to control Varroa in the middle of the summer when you may have honey supers on. And so that's what I focused on here. The question of what you can do. Um, this picture here was sent by Todd in Ontario during the big neonic debate up there. And he said, hey, all this honey came from neonic treated canola. If effective it, give me more of it. So yeah, very, very strong opinions in the state of Ontario on both sides of that coin. But yeah, it's tough to control Varroa when you got all this honey sitting on top of the hive. And as I said yesterday, there's some restrictions for the different treatments. So there's only 2 treatments that are approved for use while there is honey supers in the hive. Those of you who may be doing oxalic acid vaporization or something that is not yet approved for use. And are the HopGuard, hops beta acids, or the formic acid. The new generation of HopGuard 3, they have changed it. It's a different extraction process, so it's not as irritating or toxic to the bees, and it has a longer release rate, which is critical because it was a short acting treatment, the HopGuard 2. The Formic Pro, David has now mixed in with the sugar gel sawdust, which makes a big improvement. And in fact, I need to make a note to add that to the slideshow. I had photographs of the sawdust. Didn't put them in here. Okay, I got a note now to add that. Yeah, the Formic, the mite quick strips, you had to go back and scrape them out of the hive later on with propolis on them. The Formic Pro pads, the bees will actually remove them themselves completely if you leave them in there for a while. These are also way more when you open up the packages, the strips come in, you don't get that blast of formic acid that you get with the mite quick strips, at least when fresh. So big improvement for the Formic Pro also. I was curious how the formic acid release rate would compare between the mite quick strips, the red columns, and the Formic Pro, the blue columns. So I did this trial without any bees in the hive. So double deep foam, set out in the sun in the high 90s, and then each day measured the number of grams of formic acid lost from those strips. From previous research, I know the optimal range is somewhere here, maybe even up to here for formic release to get good mite control. So you can see for that 2 things. One, both the quick strips and the Formic Pro have identical release rates. This really surprised me. I thought that the Formic Pro would have a slower rate, but no. And 2 is that it's about 3 days when you're in that range, and it drops down, so it would have less effect on the mites. Okay, there's 2 caveats on both of these. On the HopGuard, it says, but its efficacy increases when there is less brood present. Well, the flip side of that is that the efficacy decreases when there's more brood present. And that's during the summer, I found that huge difference. Formic Pro has a recommended application temperature with 85 degrees Fahrenheit maximum. Now, I wish that get any hotter than that out in California in the summer, but that's not the case. So I experimented with it despite it being hotter. And then I wanted to try the extended release oxalic acid. And this year I tried it on these Swedish cellulose sponges, of which we made over 1,000 of these sponges, cut into either half strips, half sponges, or quarter sponges. And again, I'm the only beekeeper authorized to use that extended release oxalic acid. I have an authorization to do it here. So I'm not suggesting that anybody do those. I'm simply giving you a report on the research that I'm doing in order to hopefully get USDA to ask EPA to add this as an approved application method. So I did a test on 263 hives in 10 yards, 2 brood cycles duration. I like to wait a while with the treatments to see if they have an effect on the mites in the brood, and you can't tell that right away. So I want to see how well the mite population rebounds in 2 brood cycles. Temperatures were high, up to the high 90s with low relative humidity. And since I was testing formic acid, all of these colonies were made with second-year queens. They were brought back from almond pollination. The colonies were split into 5-frame nukes. The second-year queens were not treated. We allowed the mite levels to build up in those colonies. And we had a really miserable spring due to rain, and they did not build well. So they were only about 8 to 10 frame strength, many of them only in singles when I started the trial. And then we added boxes of either drawn comb or foundation above those singles. So the results of this, the overall efficacy results, may not apply to hives that are stacked as high as Todd's were back there, but the comparison between the different treatments should be applicable to us. And yes, I did intentionally to be fairly high so that we could get really good data as far as the reduction efficacy. Reducing from 1 mite to 0 tells you very little. Reducing from 40 mites to 0 tells you a whole lot. So the treatments I tested were 1 half sponge strip of the oxide, or 2 of them, or 2 half shop towels, hop guard applied according to manufacturer, and then 2 different applications of the Formic Pro, either 1 strip repeated after 10 days, or 2 strips applied at once, which is pretty intense during hot weather. And then we had some untreated controls. Now these controls were not really legitimate controls because they had lower mite levels to start with than many of these colonies. But I didn't want them to be crashing in the yard during the treatments. Okay, so shop towels went on the same as I had applied them in previous years. Here's a picture of a Formic Pro pad. You can see the sawdust matrix here. This is the size of half a cellulose sponge by comparison, and then the Hop Guard 3, which we really found out we liked using these disposable polyethylene restaurant gloves, our food handling gloves, much easier than the nitrile gloves to get on and off, have the hesitation to try to reuse them. They're so inexpensive, you can peel off and toss them. We also way like these kitchen tongs for handling any of the acids. You didn't even need to put gloves on if you use these kitchen tongs. Very easy to handle these 2 different acid strips. It's a typical test yard here, bare fence up, blackberries just coming into the end of bloom. And we had supered up colonies that were strong enough to run into the trial second brood chamber. And then we got a surprise, despite the temperature and the dryness, we got a surprise honey flow, and the colonies actually put on a fair amount of weight from the honey flow. So it was a legitimate test while the honey flow was on. I recorded the yard name so we can tell if there's a yard-to-yard difference, the starting mite count, the ending mite, the treatment, whether at the end of the 42 days they were queen right or queenless, and whether or not there were bees in the upper box or not. Total of 200 hives, so lots of data to crank and enter. So go over all the results here. And I'm going to show these similar to how I showed the results this morning for the probiotics, where the starting mite count here will be the blue line, and the ending mite count will be the red line. So on these graphs, if you see a lot of red, that means the mite count went up. If you see a lot of blue, that means the mite count went down. And then down here will be the yard abbreviation. So you can see whether there was a yard effect. And this here is the median value for all the hives in all the 7 years. So that would be your average here. So for the control hives, untreated controls, you see a lot of red. That means mite count to go up. On the average, 158%, so 1.5 times the starting mite count. Now, I also started them with low mite counts, below 20 in most of them, on a mite wash. If the mite counts had been higher, they would have gone up at a greater rate. So again, that's why we're comparing these controls here. And this is the one formic strip repeated, lots of blue, good to see in most everywhere except for these 3 hives in this yard. I have no idea why the mite counts would go up despite treatment. Here, actually 4 of them in this yard, only in this yard here. But down to a median value, including those, down to 70% of the starting count. So very, very good mite control across the board. For the 2 formic strips applied at the same time, again, lots of blue, good mite control, down to 20% of the starting count. But again, 2 outliers or anomalies out here, but in 2 different yards. And the point I make here is if you want to do a quick mite knockdown, acid is will give you the quickest mite knockdown of anything, because in the brood also, we use formic acid extensively in our operation. If we just remove all the mites from a hive, we give them a very strong dose of formic acid. And it clearly kills the mites rapidly. And after formic treatment, you get a short brood break and the queen starts laying again. And we always see really nice brood patterns coming back after the formic acid treatments. And here, if you look at the 2020, this was a 2020 trial. This was a box of foundation put on right at the beginning of the trial, undrawn foundation. And despite the formic acid treatment, you see the bees drew out the foundation and actually put a fair amount of honey into it. The question that beekeepers always ask is about the queens. Now, I intentionally use second-year queens, and at the time of the trial, these queens were being naturally superseded as they ran out of sperm. So we typically get supersedure on these queens in August to September, and this was run in August, so lots of supersedure happening. And the weather was well above the recommended temperature, and the temperature tells us the temperature, and I drew a red line showing what the recommended maximum temperature would be, and we couldn't wait for this break right here to put it on, but the temperature is considerably higher than the recommendation, and the second dose also higher than the recommendation. And the bees responded, as you might expect. They came pouring out of the hives. They're not like that formic. I did not set the box back to give better ventilation here. Intentionally, just I'm going to do worst case scenario for the formic treatments. We also applied them all in all 7 yards on the same day, applied right in the middle of the day, hottest part of the day, which I would not recommend. If you're going to use the formic acid during the hot weather, I would suggest that you put it on dusk as the colonies are cooling down. So the question is, did this result in queen loss? What I'll say is, I'm not sure that the formic acid actually kills the queens. When I've caged queens underneath the formic acid treatment, along with some workers, workers are as likely to die as the queens are. So I'm not positive that it's actually the formic acid that kills the queens, or whether it's the bees that the queen due to the formic acid. So this was an observation by Jim Amrine many years ago when formic was first started being used, and it hasn't been followed up on. It's a screaming research project needing for somebody to follow up on this. And here's the results. And what I did is I counted obviously either queenless or died if at the 42nd day there were no there was not a queen in that hive. So a number of the formic colonies did supersede their queen, and but many of them had a laying queen by the time I graded them. So even in the low mite controls where there was zero treatment whatsoever, we had a 5% either queenless or colony loss by the end of the 42 days. Surprisingly, with the Formic Pro, with the one strip repeated, we only had a 4%, only one colony queenless out of the 28 at the end of the trial. So again, some superseded the queen, but they were requeen. The two strips at once was more intense, but in 6 of the 7 yards, we only had 11% that were queenless at the end of the trial. But the 1 yard where we put them in right at midday, the hottest part of the day, out of the 5 hives in that yard, all 5 were queenless at the end of the trial. For the hop guard and malic acid, again, low rates of queenlessness down in the expected range down here. This one is interesting to look at, so it's something we need to follow up on here. So the point for the formic acid is the one strip repeated. You don't have a whole lot of trade-off. Very low rate of colony loss right here. And one of the things you can also do is to just, if you're, especially for the small-scale beekeeper, there's nothing to stop you from just grabbing the queen out of the hive, put her in a cage with some attendants, take her inside the house for the first days of treatment, and then sticking her back inside the hive after that big flash is off. So that's always an option. Or just put her in a nuke right next to the hive and remove her from that the formic treatment. For the hop guard, I'm not going to even show you the results. The label was poor, and I'm not the only researcher last year who misinterpreted it, thinking that I could not do a repeat treatment during the summer. Since that time, I have been working with the manufacturer, going through drafts of the label, and they're going to modify the label so that it's clearer that you can use it, repeat it during the summer. For the shop towel treatment with the extended release oxalic, a lot of blue, but really not that good a reduction. But again, we don't get that good a reduction when you're starting with a lower mite count. So we're down to 38%. For the 1 oxalic acid sponge, we start getting some pretty spectacular results. And if you see these starting mite counts, 70 mites in the first alcohol wash, you typically would just write all me on something like that. But look at this one. This one's up to 67 mites starting. And if you look carefully for the ending mite count, if there's no red showing there, that means the ending was 0. So this extended release has this potential to really take the mites from high counts down to 0. And this was in 42 days. This is for the 2 sponges. Now look at all the blue here and look at all the zeros we see here. It really tended to those counts down. I'll show you a slide on some of them where we ran these for another month after this because the counts continue to go down. So overall, when I then look for the efficacy calculation, I did it 2 different ways. I like to use some formula so that you set the controls at 0 efficacy, which makes sense, and then you calculate from there. So I did one way is added up all the mite wash counts at the start, and then added all the mite wash counts at the end, and then calculate efficacy from that. Or I took the median start, the median end. I came up with 2 different figures, but they were all in pretty much the same order. Where the Formic Pro did pretty dang good efficacy right here, but the best efficacy of all the treatments I tested was the 2 sponges with very, very high efficacy. Now, the question is, does that have that high amount of oxalic acid in the sponges? Curious whether it had adverse effects on the colony. We don't have any mics on right now, so I won't ask you, but take a good look at this brood right here, and you can make your own conclusion as to whether there was adverse effects. This is at 42 days after having these 2 oxalic acid sponges on the hives. And I'll tell you right now, with these high mite hives, the brood patterns looked way worse when I started than they looked after I was done. Okay, that was the formal trial. Now, we also tested it in several hundred hives in informal trials. And the really interesting ones is where we had these isolated yards. So I was working with some grad students from Berkeley and from UC Davis. We're working at these high elevation wet meadows. These are at 6,500 feet. And they were studying the pollinators there. So we already had pollinator observations from the flowers there prior to us bringing bees up. And the observation was there were no honeybees whatsoever with flowers, indicating there's no beehives anywhere in the vicinity, which means there's no mite drift. The other thing that was different is that, like the poor conditions where I ran the summer trial, and where there was zero drone rearing going on in those hives, up here, these were on a honey flow. They produced honey, and there was incredible drone rearing going on. The colonies just got packed with drones. I was really surprised. Why do I care about the drones? Is that if the colonies are rearing drones, your mite rate of increase will go way. Mites reproduce most effectively in the drone brood. So because of that high rate of drone brewing, these colonies should have just gotten run over by mites. Then the other thing, as I said, there were no other hives around, so no mite drift. I'm going to turn off my video for a minute, get better width. So here's some hives we brought back, 63 days from, we dropped them off up there and they came back 2 months later and picked the hives up, brought them back down. And the low mite starting counts, we started with a 1 sponge treatment, and the high mite starting counts start with a 2 sponge treatment. And you can see we have a lot of blue showing here. That's only the first yard. The second 2 yards, we got a lot more blue here. And this one here, we put them on, we brought these back last. This is after 77 days, so 2.5 months. So they went into this yard with very high mite counts, lots of drone rearing, with honey coming in, came back looking like this. And we unloaded the load, brought it home, and the next day went out with my son Eric, and he ran the agitator, and I took the samples from the hives. And after he'd taken a number of samples, I said, "Hey Eric, how are the mite counts looking?" He says, "Dad, I've never seen so many zeros in a row." He was pretty dang stoked that we had taken a bunch of high mite hives, intentionally high mite hives, up, put on these oxalic acid sponges, walked away from them for 2.5 months, and brought these hives back full of honey and without mites. So yes to honey, mites, really exciting. We had a 4th yard also that was totally isolated for a pumpkin pollination in an isolated valley in the desert of Nevada, honeybees there. And the boys take up the hives up there in July for pumpkin pollination. And then they like to wait until just before Halloween. So they load of pumpkins when they pick up the hives and bring them back. Because they don't bother with those hives all summer, they usually come back looking like crap. They just super high mites off. Most of them never even make it to almonds because they're just in such poor shape. The boys came back this year with big smiles on their faces and saying, "Dad, we could hardly load the damn hives on the truck. They were so damn heavy. Got a huge honey crop off of them. And when we checked them for mites, it was zeros across the board." So just amazing. And where you have isolation away from other hives and mite drift, these extended release oxalic acid will kill the mites in the hive, even with these very, very high starting mite counts. Then we also ran a bunch of our other trials where we were monitoring these hives, these numbered hives. And these we started from nukes. And while they were nukes, we put a quarter sponge, just a little strip either hung over the top bars in the nuke, or if they were in a double, we put a sponge cut this way over them. So a very low dose of oxalic acid onto these nukes, and then ran them cards. And we did some follow-up. So we took starting mite counts, again, the blue, and ending. So these were done from the June when we started them to end of July. So you can see they just brought the mites down very nicely, whether they were laid flat, whether they're hung over the top bars. These were put in June, came back and did the mite washes in September. And again, you see no mites counts worth worrying about. What we saw is if these colonies, if we started them as nukes with a small strip of oxalic acid and left them alone, it wasn't until mid-September the mites started climbing at all. So very nice summer treatment. So it's a long-term treatment, and it works best in yards where there is little mite immigration. Now, and ideally, this is a treatment you'll be able to put on when you put your honey supers on, and then walk away from the hive. And when you take your honey supers off, you pull the honey and you got no mites in the hive. So it can be pretty amazing. Here's the extended treatment here. We did the grading at day 42, and you can see if I left them for another month, those mite counts just continued to go down on the two treatments. A couple of interesting observations. One is, this is a trial I did in 2008. I was testing a bunch of different ratios of oxalic acid to glycerin. And I did natural mite fall counts. Our baseline was this green dotted line. That's how many mites were falling per day. And then when we put this was on shop towels, it goes up to 15 baseline count for a few days and drops down. But it doesn't drop down below the baseline. It stays above the baseline for close to a month before it finally starts to drop down. So it's an extended treatment. It's a slow attrition of these mites. Now, think if you're knocking a whole bunch of mites off, like you would with a formic or oxalic vaporization, and then you have this constant attrition for a month, what would you expect alcohol wash counts of those bees to be doing at the same time if you're just constantly killing these mites on the bee? Now, most people would say, well, we expect the alcohol wash counts to go down. That makes perfect sense. Here's the alcohol wash data. Our baseline, starting mite count, green dotted line, and the alcohol wash counts go up for a month. Finally, after a month, they go down, they start going towards zero here. Well, this is really, really puzzled me when I saw this. I said, how can that be that the mite wash counts would go up even though the mites are dying at a much higher rate? And the only explanatory hypothesis is that somehow this oxalic acid on glycerin is preventing the mites from getting the cue to re-enter the cells. And since they're not re-entering the brood cells, they're staying on the adult bees, keeping the mite wash counts up. And because they're not reproducing, their population just slowly dwindles down to zero. So this would be some really exciting research for somebody to follow up on. I don't be able to do it this year. See if I can hire a technician to actually see if we can tell if that's what's happening. The other thing is at the end of the trial, so these are sponges after 42 days. Notice the bees they propolize the edges, but not over the top of them at all. And there's still looks moist. That's because this glycerin in there continues to absorb moisture from the air and dissolve the oxalic acid for this slow release. But when I took them off and weighed these sponges, I could then calculate how much oxalic acid was actually lost. And it was very, very little. Now, only maybe a quarter or a fifth of the oxalic acid on the sponges ever made it into the hive. The rest just stayed on the sponge. So very little oxalic acid is necessary to get this good mite control. The reason apparently why the 2-sponge treatment worked better than the 1 sponge was not because of the oxalic acid released, but because just more surface area for bee contact. So this is more research we need to do to figure that out. So some questions to answer. One, why when Jennifer Berry tried it in Georgia, she didn't get as consistent results? We suspected that it might have to do with humidity. But then I found there's a student, a high school student, who wanted a research project in Virginia. I said, hey, if you get a experimental use permit, I'll work with you. Did got an experimental use permit. Try this in the high humidity Virginia and got 88% efficacy with the treatment, bottom down. And then this was just recently published here down in Veracruz, Mexico. Now, I was down in Veracruz speaking to the beekeepers down there a few years ago. This photograph, you can see all the how they do their mite guards at the base of all their hive stands here. Ant guards, I mean, the ant guard. But if you look around here, tell me about the humidity here. This probably looks a little bit different than Utah here. This is tropical, humid rainforest around here. So very high humidity. And 88% efficacy again with the Argentine formula of extended release oxalic acid. So it does not be a humidity thing. It appears to have been a mite drift issue in Georgia rather than a humidity issue. So now these are kind of expensive. And they kind of get soft later on. I think, wait, here's the smudge right here. So I'm testing out different matrices. I've actually got over a dozen alternative matrices that are less expensive and look good and worthy of treating. I'm trying some that have some polyester in them so they will pull out more easily. So this will be some research I'm going to do this spring. The other thing I want to do, I want to track the distribution of oxalic acid in the hive. So I'll be doing this using fluorescent tracers that I can track with ultraviolet light. But even more so, I developed this technique last year, and I just have not had enough seconds in my days to follow up on this. That I can take a 5 milliliters of distilled water, put it into this test tube, add a indicator solution to change the color, and then adjust the pH to this 6 range right here. Oxalic acid will drop it down to a pH below 4. Then I can take an individual bee, pick it out of the hive, and drop it right into here. And the amount of oxalic acid will, if it has a lot of oxalic acid, it'll drop it all and turn the solution orange. Most of them are somewhere in this range right here. I can then drop a titrant back one at a time to bring this solution back to the original match the blue color right here. And then by counting the number of drops, I can tell you how many micrograms of oxalic acid on that bee. And you can do this sitting next to the hive. It takes about 15 seconds, a sample to process, really, really quick. So I've tested it with the oxalic dribble, and an hour after you dribble, you get very good distribution of the oxalic acid on the bees. I've also tested it vaporization and was unable to detect any oxalic acid on the bees. I was really surprised by that. I even went back to the hive a couple of times, picked up dead bees off the bottom board, and a few of those I could detect oxalic acid residues, but not on the bees from the cluster after vapors. I need to follow up on that. Right now, what I'm seeing is we have done a lot of, over the years, a ton of formic acid, a ton of applications of oxalic acid, and this is the safest and easiest application method we have ever found for using either of those organic acids, especially if you use the tongs here for handling either of those types of strips. You want to always carry, using any acids, baking soda solution. And I've done experimentation to see how strong you need to make it. And remember this, write this down, 10 heaping tablespoons of baking soda per gallon of water. When you get up to that level, if you get this on your hands or on your hive tool, either formic or oxalic, neutralize it instantly. You'll just see it all bubble up on your hands in a couple of seconds. It'll be all neutralized. The reality is, with formic, you don't on your skin. I have inadvertently peeled all the skin off my hands in the past, learning it the hard way. You don't want to do that. This oxalic acid, it's really, really safe to handle, much, much safer than formic acid. This can be on your skin for quite a while, and if you don't with it, you don't even notice it at all. Very easy to wash off. We get it on our skin all the time, and when we're done at each yard, grab the baking soda, we rinse our hands off, and our smoker and our hive tool, and everything is really clean and safe. How to bulk produce these? Very easy. This was really simple. These are quarter sponge strips. You slice them on a saw, and we put 80 of them in a plastic tub. Take 1,000 grams of oxalic acid, 1,000 grams of glycerin, heat it up, pour it over here, let it just soak in. The next day, the oxalic acid crystallizes on here, and then these are just ready to use. A very, very quick method of preparation. Again, this is not experimental only, but this is going to be in our operation, I can tell you right now, a complete game changer for rural management to work system of rotating treatments during the year. Then I noticed on here it said what kind of works in this. So I'm going to be working on the oxalic acid tweaks and the distribution of oxalic acid. I want to try the extended release Thymol also. Then I've been doing a lot of work with, because of these colonies did so poorly during the summer, I've done a deep dive into water economies within hive and how colonies use water and when. One of the older researchers, Lindauer, who did the best paper ever on this, said, during the springtime, if it's raining outside and the bees can't fly, those colonies can be starving for water inside the hive. Seems counterintuitive. So I'm going to want to test that also by giving bees free choice feeding of water versus sugar syrup within the hive at various times of the year, whether we're being smart about feeding our hives. Got some ideas for insulated hive design. I'll be looking at using, so I'm kind of adverse to plastic hives and styrofoam hives. So I got some ideas here. I've done a lot of thermal testing of to keep our hive cool during the summer. And the with the mite washes. So what we use here out in the field is these portable agitators that I hand about here. They're battery powered. They recharge overnight very easily with an adapter, and they can run off the car battery also. They're all 12-volt units. So we put up a whole bank of these, and so we don't do any hand agitation of our mite wash cups at all. This completely changes it. And a few years ago, if you asked me, Randy, are you saying that, I was asked a number of times, are you thinking that a beekeeper is going to do a mite wash on every hive in the operation? And I said, no, that'd be crazy. That will never happen. Too time intensive. Now, my sons in June say, Dad, when can we mite wash every hive in the operation? And they say that because it saves us money. By knowing where your mites stand in the whole operation in June for every hive in the operation, it saves you money and you are more productive. So it more than pays for itself, but it requires mechanical agitators. These are, I tried finding somebody to produce these, but they're kind of expensive, $110, $120 just for parts alone for them. And what I've done here is I've dedicated a mite wash vehicle. This is my Honda CRV, and it's got a pull-out table with a leveling bubble, a leg that goes down. We pull it out, we set up so we can just be ready for agitation and just do hundreds of samples at a time. We switched from using alcohol to using Dawn detergent, 1 tablespoon, half gallon. And the trick with Dawn is you allow the bees to set in the solution for a full minute minimum before you do any agitation. Most of the mites will fall off prior to any agitation at all with the Dawn. And then the second trick is, because of the foam on the top, you can't look down, you have to look up. Use a 10x magnifying mirror underneath, like a 6-inch diameter one. And I have a stand that holds the cups. You just drop them in the stand, and then if you look down here, you get your mite count very easily. And here's Tom, one of our employees, with the stand right here and the mirror. And after we agitate the cup, we drop in the stand. You look right here, you get your mite count, and we write them all down. Everything is color coded, so you write down the cup color and the mite count, and then we can, and all the then color coded with movable markers. So we've got a system through trial and error, heavy on the error, but we've got a system that we just fly through mite washes now. Let's see. Well, I guess that's the last one. Our research is funded by donations from beekeepers and beekeeping clubs. I'm not funded by any manufacturers, so I appreciate to all those of you who have contributed to this research. And now I'm open to taking questions.
There's 10 questions down there, 11 now for you, Randy, to get started with.
Oh, that's right. I keep forgetting that. There we go. What are your thoughts on non-maximum temperature control? Okay, first thing is I never give you my thoughts. If I don't have data, then I got nothing to say. I have hard data that these high temperature ones are really screwing up. They are degrading the oxalic acid, and they may, if you put 2 grams into the vaporizer, you may only get 1 gram of oxalic acid out of it. As soon as it gets above 190, it starts to degrade instantly into carbon dioxide and water, and it is no longer oxalic acid. I figured out a method of doing this, of taking mylar balloons that are laid out flat, nothing in them, making a little cork with a hole in it, so I can take the vent for the oxalic acid vaporizer and shoot that plume of oxalic vapor into the mylar balloon. And okay, let me ask you, have any of you guys used oxalic acid vaporizers?
Yeah, we do. Yes, there are.
Okay, leave your mic on. Okay, so you do. Have you seen that big old cloud of oxalic vapor that comes out of the vaporizer?
Well, I've seen the cloud. I don't know if it's
okay. So now let me ask you this. No, I'm going to ask you a question. I want to make sure that you have seen that big cloud coming up. Imagine I have a flat mylar balloon and I shoot that big cloud into that mylar balloon. What would you expect to see happen?
I'd expect it to blow up.
Right, and you'd be totally wrong. It doesn't do a thing.
Nope.
No inflation whatsoever until the temperature of the vaporizer reaches 190 degrees, and then it starts to inflate because it's no longer oxalic acid. Now it's carbon dioxide going into the balloon. And if I weigh those balloons before and after, I can tell how much of the acid remained as oxalic acid because it just condenses right back inside the balloon, and you can see it weigh it in the balloon. So I've got a bunch more balloons. I need to follow up on that, but yeah, a lot of guys are running their vaporizers at too high temperature. Okay, any success with top bar hives? I don't have any top bar hives, but running like I showed in the nukes, we just drape the sponges over the top. You can't do it with the towels. The bees will chew on a lot of them, the towels at the edge, and they fall down. But the sponges, they didn't chew those, and that worked very well. So I would imagine that could work in topper hives once it's approved and legal, because it's not legal to use yet, and I don't want to get in trouble saying it, making you think that I would ever suggest that you use this hive. Okay, in the high elevation, we did not see any adverse effect, and I'm not saying there's not an adverse effect, but we just don't see it. Okay. Oh, this information, is working right now, getting all 4 of the articles that were in ABJ up on uploaded to my website. So it should be up there any day now. If you're on my mailing list for scientific beekeeping, I will send a notification out when we post those articles so you can take a look at them. Are you going to reuse the sponges? It depends on the brand. We had one brand that after we used them, we left them out in the rain in the winter. They washed out and they were as good as new. We could have recharged them. This other brand that I used this year gets softer. And I'm not necessarily crazy about the sponges, so that's why I'm trying some other application methods. What are the dimensions? 3.5 by 8. And yes, 25 grams, 3.5 by 8 holds the 1-to-1 mixture. So half of 50 grams is 25 grams. Do you ever make your own formic acid mix? That would be illegal, but I know of plenty of guys who have made a lot of their own formic acid mix. How's that? They buy it each year by the 55-gallon drum. I have lots of experience with formic acid, although I would never apply an off-label mix. What recipe are you using in your operation? 1-to-1, 1 gram of oxalic acid to 1 gram of glycerin. And if you look at my website on the home page, it has details of how we did that in case another researcher wants to try to duplicate this experiment with the proper permit. Use 2 formic pro strips following harvest, 20 colonies, put them on the evening. Went out leaving the grounds with carpeted, crawling, dying bees. Wow, I've never seen that happen before. We've used all we've used a ton of formic acid at all kinds of temperatures. We run it at 100 degrees outside on singles, a very high amount, and I've never seen a carpet of crawling dying bees. So I have no idea what happened. That's really strange. I'm sorry to hear that. Have I ever tried a low sudsing laundry detergent for mite washes? What do you think? Of course I have, and it didn't work. The sudsing action seems to be the critical thing. Okay, I run all mediums. Okay, how to convert mite treatment directions to this configuration? Okay, well, it's roughly 2/3. So you use 2/3 of the amount. Another thing with this, with the Formic Pro, like when we're using treating 5-frame nukes, we'll put a half Formic Pro strip on a 5-frame nuke over the top bars, and we push the lid down tight against it, and that stops evaporation through the top of the strip. And those strips, instead of blasting out and drying out in just a few days, even though they're out in the sun and that lid is quite hot, they'll have plenty of formic acid left in them a week later. So it slows down the release rate, and you're able to use that on nukes. I haven't tried it yet, but I can't see any reason why you couldn't just put a piece of plastic over one side of it to use it to reduce the release rate in the hive also. So there's all kinds of ways to work with formic acid to reduce it. Another thing I found is the part also will slow down the release, and then afterwards the bees will chew it all up. Okay. Dawn should be 1 tablespoon of Dawn Ultra to a half gallon of water. 1 tablespoon to half gallon. Okay. Do you recommend to just apply oxalic sponges or towel spray? I don't make any recommendations. What we found in this trial, where we, with our operating permit, put them in early when the mite levels were fairly low, at a low rate, and just left them in until later in the season proactively, they worked very well. So in general, proactive treatments are way better than reactive treatments. There is no best guess as to when it will be approved. I sent questions to Dr. Jay Evans. He answered them all, and they are his answers are all in my last article. But he answered them in bureaucratese, so I don't know if that's going to apply. And if you have a single deep, don't get hung up in the 25 grams. Like I said, maybe only 5 grams of that ever gets into the hive. So this is guys, what I'm showing you is not a recommendation to do this. I'm telling you that this is a work in progress, and I'm trying to recruit researchers or beekeepers to get experimental use permits so that they can actually, it's not just one person out here year after year saying, guys, we got this fantastic treatment out here, we got to get it registered. I'm not that traction to get it out there, and I can't do it all myself. So we still have lots to learn.
Hey, Randy, Daniel Schoenthal indicated that he uses a 12-volt DC magnetic stirrer to stir for his mite washes. Have you tried that? And
I haven't tried that one. I'm working. Oh, that's what I got. What I'm working on now is it's one thing is all these inexpensive motors and stuff from China are back order issues, but I was able to order a vibrator motor, not the kind you guys use behind the bedroom doors, but it has 2 offset weights on the shaft. So I got a little 12-volt vibrator motor, and I've just set up a device with some springs to test that. I'm trying to come up with a much cheaper design for that I can publish plans for mite washing. And the only reason I don't have them is because I ran out of high mite hives last fall to calibrate and I need to have bees with a bunch of mites on them to calibrate the efficacy of different agitation methods. So after the bees come back from almonds and we start doing some mite washes, then I will have some high mite hives, and most likely, and then I can try out different agitation methods and hopefully come up with a simple device that you can build yourself for doing it. Other than the trick with the Dawn, it does not take much agitation, unlike with alcohol, where it does take a fair amount of agitation. With the Dawn, the mites just go and want to fall. Yeah, I've got some articles on my website published fairly recently with great details on mite washes, mite agitations, and the different agents, including powdered sugar, that you can use. So plenty of information on that on my website. Okay, how to apply for the experimental use permit? You need to go to your state lead agency for the EPA. So that's usually the Department of Agriculture or the Department of Pesticide Regulation of that state, and apply for a experimental use permit. Some states apparently are easier than others. Then I could once you get the permit, I can help you with the protocol. I know with Soren, when he got his from the state of Virginia, they called my Department of Pesticide Regulation and used me as an advisor, so to help him get his permit. And Richard, I don't understand yours. To help, not enough words for an answer.
I think all those were essentially the same question, Randy. So that was good information.
Oh, okay.
As a matter of fact, I think our next presenter, he's with the Department of Agriculture and Food in the state, and he might, this might be a good segue. He might be able to help answer some of those questions about experimental permits.
Excellent. Excellent.
So does Randy need to pass the host now? No, let's see. He's, one more question there for you, Randy.
Yeah, I see it. Okay, so it's really easy to evolve resistance to synthetic miticides because they work at the sodium gated ion channels in the nervous system. And all they need to do is just a mutation for one tiny protein to mutate, and that confers resistance. The organic acids and thymol, they're like more of trying to evolve resistance to a blowtorch. They just are really tough, membrane destroying chemicals. And the problem for the mite is if they toughen their exoskeleton, they will not be able to hide on the bees' bodies, to groom them off easily. And if they, the main point where the oxalic acid enters the mite's body is through its empodia, which are the little sticky inflatable pads on the bottom of their feet. If you ever want to do something really cool, get a 400x microscope, put a mite on a microscope slide upside down, then drop a thin cover slip on it, a glass cover slip, and watch it walk upside down over the slide. And each step down, this little empodia inflates like a balloon and sticks to the glass slide. That's how they hang on to the bees. Well, if they lost that empodium, they would not be able to hang on to the bees, and it'll just fall right off. So that's the Achilles heel for the mites, oxalic acid, and it's hard to imagine how they could evolve resistance to it. That said, I would still look for or do rotation of operation, and we continue to do that. If you just, biology has an amazing way of finding ways around things, so I would not depend upon any single peroxalic acid. And for me, all of these are stopgap measures. They're band-aids until we have mite-resistant bees, and that's why I'm working so hard on this study program to develop mite-resistant bees. And somebody asked me, I think yesterday, about stock. Kirk Webster and Seeley, Tom Seeley, mentioned about Kirk's stop. Keep that in mind. He's one of them, and there may be other ones out there.
Randy, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. We really appreciate everything. We're going to take a 5-minute break here before we start up with our next presenter.
Sounds good.
Hey, one more thing just to quickly add in. Just a reminder to everybody that Randy's doing this for us. He's not doing it for personal gain. He's doing it for the bee industry. So please take time and donate to his cause to help fund this research that will in return come back to us as beekeepers.
Thank you.